November 5th, 2024. This is episode 59 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the Week 10 football games in the Big Ten. We're going to try and keep this a little short because there is something big going around the country tonight, and everybody knows what that is. But, Joe, we will hop right into it with the game that was probably one of the biggest games of the sport in the weekend. Ohio State rolls down to Happy Valley in big noon kickoff. And, Joe, they get themselves a big top three road win. The Buckeyes victorious over the Nittany Lions, 20-13. We talked about it a little bit yesterday in our Power Rankings episode, if you haven't watched that already. But both teams made mistakes, and Ohio State made Penn State pay for theirs. Ohio State wins.
John, I thought this was the most important victory, as I said yesterday or on our last cast. If you haven't listened, this was the most important victory of the Ryan Day era since the 2021 semifinal against Clemson. I really mean that. I think they've had some big wins in between, but this was the most needed. Probably to reassure the fan base that not necessarily that Ryan Day's the guy. I think his record should speak for itself, and if not, that's beyond unreasonable. It's not even worth contending to that kind of mindset. But in terms of beating a top three team on the road, really dominating them, and the way Ohio State started the game, this is what they did wrong in the Michigan game last year. Started with an early hole caused by an interception, and in this case, it was a pick six, Sean. And if you're a Penn State fan, you're up 10-0. You're thinking, man, all is right in the world. Ohio State didn't let them get that thought for much longer. Driving right down the field, throwing a dart to Emeka Egbuka, who was wide open. From their shot, it kind of felt like Penn State was on the retreat. Although they held the lead, there were very few people in the stadium who probably believed they were going to hold it. And Ohio State immediately takes it back with Brandon Inniss, who, by the way, Sean, I got to give credit to Ohio State. I know we always talk about the Jeremiah Smiths, the Quinshon Judkins, the Travion Hendersons. It was a lot of their no-name, or maybe not no-name, but their lesser contributors, we'll call it, for lack of a better politically correct term. Jelani Thurman, Brandon Inniss. A lot of guys out there making big plays, especially on that fourth down by Jelani Thurman. We've heard a lot about him in the offseason, but to see it on that juggling catch on fourth down was really nice to see for the Buckeye Nation. Sean, before I touch on Penn State, do you want to touch more on Ohio State before we go to James Franklin?
Well, obviously, the mistakes were still there, which was the reason why they lost the Oregon game. He throws the pick six early on to give Penn State their first points, and Will Howard also fumbles, essentially at the 1 yard line. So if you really do think about it, Ohio State I think they did keep Penn State in this game. It always felt like they were going to win, and they ultimately did, but they get away with this one. It's a road win against a good Penn State team. And at this point, I think we both thought that Ohio State was better. We showed it yesterday in our power rankings, and a one-score win for Ohio State was probably the most likely outcome. And Joe, we kind of lost it in the shuffle of all the chaos, whether it's the start of college basketball season, college football, the election. The college football playoff rankings did come out tonight, the first ones. And not surprisingly, Ohio State came in as the 5 seed, number 2 overall, though. So Oregon will hold the automatic qualifier spot with number 1. They are number 1 overall. So Ohio State is number 2, and that is the 5th seed in the Big Ten. Now, there's a couple more Big Ten teams in here, and we'll get to them later. But, Joe, with the way that it's set up right now, the 5 seed might not be the worst place to be. You'll likely play the Group of 5 champion, and you'll likely play the Big 12 champion. You'd have to think that if Ohio State finds themselves in this scenario, they were likely to go to the semifinals.
Yeah, Sean, I completely agree with that. I don't want to go too far ahead for Buckeye Nation because they do have two, maybe one and a half tough games remaining. I know the Michigan game we could talk about at length with the rivalry and whatnot. I do want to jump to Penn State, Sean, unless you want to interrupt or cut in.
Well, they come in at number 6 overall in the rankings, which is good for the 7th seed. Look, it's their first loss of the year. They're still probably going to the college football playoff, but this definitely would have cemented it.
Yeah, I think more importantly, Sean, because I look at the remainder of their schedule, they're going to be favored by double digits in the rest of their games. Frankly, they should blow all 4 of the teams they play out. And if not, if they lose one, then they're really flirting with it. But in terms of as a whole for Penn State, it's hard to not feel that this is the exact same story revolving over and over the past 8 years since the 2016 victory over Ohio State. Jump out to an early lead, give it all away at the end of the first half. And then I just want to talk about the miscues. 1 for 3 scoring wise in the red zone, 0 for 3 on touchdowns, the sole touchdown being by the defense. Andy Koldenicki was brought in. Do not get me wrong, he's made the offense better. He was brought in to win these type of games, and I'm not going to fault him because I think a lot of his players did not do him any justice. The first play, the Drew Aller interception in the red zone at the 1 yard line. I do understand with the time throwing there, and ultimately, I thought Igbenusa made a heck of a play. Outside of that, Sean, the most inexplicable call of the game, how they managed those 4 downs within the 3 yard line, a run, and then a pass on 4th down. Sean, that's going to be talked about for days and days and days. And James Franklin, I don't think he shied away from owning it. I mean, he owned it all. I don't want to get into the after the game stuff with the fan. I do think Penn State fans have every right to be upset. I think, it's hard to not be upset after seeing this 8 years in a row. And really, of those 8 matches with Ohio State they've lost in a row, there were 6 of them Penn State has substantial chance of winning. And that's probably the most frustrating part. And in this, if they scored one more TD, this game's probably theirs. Ending the game, though, the way Ohio State did it kind of reminded me of last year's Michigan team, of running out 5.5 minutes from the Ohio State, from their own goal line essentially, and doing that in spite of Will Howard fumbling, that in spite of the pick six
with relative ease too. That clock chewed quick, and it never maybe 1 or 2. I don't even remember a 3rd and long in that set.
No,
it was impressive.
33.
It was impressive from Ohio State, and it's kind of just more of the same for Penn State, Joe. They come up short against an opponent equal or better than them quality-wise. But comes to the Big Ten championship game for Penn State, Joe, the scenarios in which they make it to Indianapolis are definitely on the rarer side at this point. They do need Ohio State to lose, and it to not be Indiana. So that certainly narrow, because if Indiana were to beat Ohio State and Oregon were to win out, it would be Indiana and Oregon. And then if Ohio State beat Indiana, win the rest of theirs, it'd be Ohio State and Oregon. So Penn State needs to find a way to get Ohio State to 2 Big Ten losses, Indiana to 1, and then they would have the tiebreaker via strength of schedule or strength of opponents or something like that. So it's certainly not likely that Penn State goes to Indianapolis, but still you got a chance to host a first-round game of the college football playoff.
Yeah, Sean, and I do want to put all that in perspective. I know in the moment, Penn State fans are really upset, and like I said, they have every right to be. But in the grand scheme of the season, getting to the quarterfinals and then the semifinals, I think is well within reach for Penn State. Although, what's inevitable, Sean, they have to improve this offense. They have to find ways to improve the passing game. They have to find ways to involve Bo Perdue more if Drew Aller's injury is going to linger. And quite frankly, Sean, they cannot allow a team like Ohio State to run the clock the way they did and control the game. Because if Will Howard doesn't fumble there, if they don't throw the pick six, this game might look like an Ohio State, 35-10 kind of game. And it really could have been that. But all the credit in the world to Ohio State. I think a lot of people question Ryan Day's team's identities as a tough team. I really think, not ironically, this is a really tough team. The way they grinded the game out, the way they stuck with it, and the way that they were only up a score the whole game, but you never really felt like Penn State was actually going to come back.
All right, Joe. Well, that's almost 10 minutes against probably the best game that deserves to be talked about the most, and the two teams will probably both be in the playoff. Let's hope for their fan bases that they are. And then we'll move on to another game, Joe, that was a little bit shocking when we saw the line for this one. Minnesota goes on the road to Illinois, ranked Illinois, as favorites. Now, a lot of people said, momentum's on Minnesota's side. Well, it certainly was. They win by 8. It's Yeah, their fourth straight win. They improved to 6-3. All of a sudden, Illinois takes a step back to 6-3. We talked about Minnesota not getting everything out of their performances results wise. Well, all of a sudden, they've got a 4-game win streak. Illinois dropped a couple in a row. And on the surface, Joe, this isn't the most surprising result, that's for sure.
No, Sean, this is a case of two teams that record-wise were pretty similar, but in terms of the way they were trending, Minnesota's been one of the hottest teams in the conference, and this is why we ranked them in our top third in our power rankings yesterday, Sean. Max Brosberg's really put it together. I think that's the biggest reason for Minnesota's turnaround. I think the defense has gotten better, but that usually happens as PJ Fleck teams progress through a season. PJ Fleck teams seldom get worse unless injuries or even COVID in that 2020 season are a factor. Now, I do want to credit Darius Taylor. It was vintage Darius Taylor, 22 carries, 131 yards. I thought he was spectacular. I thought that really helped Minnesota control the clock, control the offense. And Max Brosberg, although this wasn't his greatest game in the air, he didn't turn that ball over, and he couldn't even rush it either. He just knew he had to be a game manager in this game, let the defense win it. And the defense did their job, forcing 2 fumbles on Luke Altmaier, recovering both of them, limiting big plays by Illinois. I think their longest play of the game shot was 42 yards. So a huge credit to the Minnesota defense, a huge credit to Max Brosberg, a huge credit to Darius Taylor. And right now, if you're Minnesota, now Indy is certainly out of reach, but perhaps looking at the remainder of the schedule, maybe 10 wins isn't the most unrealistic thing. I do think that's going to require a huge upset of Penn State, but the way things are trending, I would not take the Penn State-Minnesota game lightly that we're going to see here in 3 weeks. So really exciting things on the horizon for Minnesota. They do have to take care of business against Rutgers, but ultimately I like where they stand as it stands.
Yeah, Joe, there are a couple of kicks of the football, whether it's missed field goals or an onside kick, away from being 8-1. And it's easier to say that than to actually mean it, but they truly are very close to being 8-1. And that wasn't exactly on the cards, and they're 6-3, and they're trending in the right direction. They're certainly now headed to a bowl game, and if they win a couple more games, it'll be a pretty good one. Now, for Illinois, Joe, this was kind of just where they've fallen short this year. Their offense just not good enough. Their defense pretty solid. No crazy turnovers from the offense, but again, you had a fourth quarter lead, and you were not able to shut the door. Brett Bielema's team drops to 6-3.
Yeah, Sean, I think it's really disappointing, especially the way they started the year, especially the way they dominated Michigan. But as we've seen, that there's a lot more context to that than usual. Now that Michigan's offense has shown their true colors, and they've lost probably 2 games in a way that underperforms their expectation. Losing this game certainly was it, and then not even being competitive against Oregon for any portion of the game. I do think the positive side for Illinois is they could accomplish a lot of things. I do think getting to 9 wins is well within the realm of possibility. Now, do I think that fans are going to look at this season as a missed opportunity? Probably, but at the end of the day, Sean, they're going to be favored in the last 3 games. If you get to 9-3 with a chance to get to 10, I have a hard time believing many people in Champaign are going to be that upset. So, certainly disappointed for the moment, but I do think Illinois' season has a lot more left to play for.
Yeah, and expectations go up and down in a 12-game season. Not very high to start the year. Got extremely high with a couple nice performances, and now they're sort of fighting the level there. We're a pretty good team, definitely a top half team here, but it's not going to be, Illinois is not going to be going to the college football playoff. All right, Joe, this one shouldn't take long. Northwestern gets a win on the road at Purdue in overtime. Definitely the Boilers' best chance to get a Big Ten win. That comes up short. Jack Lausch and the Wildcats get to 4-5. At least for now, Northwestern seems to be winning the games that they should.
Yeah, I think this was a business-esque performance, and I don't mean that because normally we say it in the context of a team wins by 2 scores comfortably without doing anything flashy. Northwestern had to pull out all stops for this. They were not good. They threw an interception. That was Ryan Holinsky, actually. They relied on Joseph Hyman. I did not think we would be saying that name a lot this year. Very limited playing time most of the year. He had a heck of a game. Cam Porter, heck of a game. It was really good to see AJ Henning and Porter clicking at the same time. I did think they could have been a little more creative using Henning and Porter in the run game. Regardless, though, if you're Northwestern, you're just happy to escape with a win because you look at their remaining schedule against Ohio State, Illinois, and Michigan, and there might not be a lot of those in demand, to be quite honest. And for Purdue, uh, this is probably your best opportunity to win for the rest of the year. So it's really unfortunate. Perhaps you could play spoiler to Penn State. Uh, Not even going to mention Ohio State this Saturday and perhaps you could ruin Michigan State's chances at bowl eligibility. But other than that, Sean, uh, it's hard to. It's going to be really hard for me to believe that Purdue's going to pick up any win in this conference for 2024.
Yeah, this was important for Northwestern. I think inevitably they were going to take a step back from the win total last year, but they've lost games where they're just not as good as the other team, and you can't really fault anybody for that. But you can get away with those. You can get away with losing the games to better teams if you beat the teams that you're better than. That happened here. Northwestern keeps Purdue. That basically eliminates the rushing attack, which is a sign of positive sign for their defense. All right, Joe, up next, Oregon, the number one Ducks head to the Big House. They do end up winning 38-17. They led 28-10 at halftime. Michigan did cut it to an 11-point game, but all things considered, Oregon goes into one of the toughest atmospheres in the country, and they get a comfortable victory. Oregon, really good, clearly the number one team overall, and Michigan, unfortunately, just doesn't quite have the talent that some of these other elite teams have.
No, and I think you can take away two things from this game, and I'm going to merge both of them because I think they're both fair. Oregon has so many ways to beat you. Michigan's one of the better defenses they will play, and that includes teams that they're going to see in the playoff. Now, Ohio State was the best defense they saw, but this Michigan team could stop the run, and they're normally pretty effective getting to the quarterback. Dylan Gabriel barely got touched in this game, Sean. When he did, he's so good at escaping the pocket, so good at evading tackles. Jordan James was able, and this is the difference, Sean. Oregon, by opening up the pass game, can open up the run game too. And there's so many ways this offense could beat you. Now that Dylan Gabriel's making better decisions, the ceiling for this offense is as high as ever. And Trayshawn Holden, 6 receptions, 150 yards. Evan Stewart, people are going to talk about the touchdown that was on the ground. The fact he's out there affecting number one DBs, or at least replacing number one DBs, because both Jair Hill and Will Johnson were out for Michigan, opens up a lot of the passing game for guys like Trayshawn Holden, Justice Lowe, Terrence Ferguson, who I think is one of the more underrated tight ends in the entire country. Then looking at the Michigan side, I actually thought they played a pretty respectable game. I thought they made a few critical errors. I thought, the punt in the third quarter where they misaligned was really terrible. I thought the trick play, I don't even want to bring it up. I mean, I think a third grader would have called a better play than that. That was one of the dumbest play calls I've ever seen in my life. It's probably top 3, along with the Colston Loveland Philly special and the Seahawks throwing at the 1-yard line. I think it's that realm of stupidity. Positives for Michigan. Colston Loveland, I have a hard time believing he's not going to be a top 15 pick. The way he's playing,
Yeah,
he is the Michigan offense.
He'll certainly be the first tight end off the board from, any mock draft that you'll look at. He's a really good player, but Joe, other than that, he's probably the only really good player on that offense.
He's probably the only good player on that offense. I hate to say it. I love Donovan Edwards, but this version of him and Kalel Mullings, the past 3 weeks has been unacceptable.
Yeah, the rushing attack did not get going here. They did get over the 100-yard mark, but 28 carries, less than 4 yards a carry. For a team so limited in the passing game, you really had to do a lot more here to have a chance, and ultimately they didn't.
No, Sean, and I guess one bright spot for Michigan is if they play like this against Northwestern, they will likely become bowl eligible. Because this kind of offensive performance against the team they're playing next is not going to suffice. I guarantee it. So for Oregon, I give this a really good performance. I'm not going to say business-like because I didn't even think they played any hand. They didn't throw any plays out there that they hadn't shown all year. So I think for Oregon, this just shows that consistently they're a really good team. And that's something Dan Lanning teams have struggled with. I have yet to see a bad Oregon performance outside of non-conference. So I think that's a great sign for Oregon. I don't see them being in much danger the rest of the year outside of a trip to Madison in 2 weeks. So the Ducks, they'll probably be the number one team in the country for the rest of this regular season. And for Michigan, I think their season comes down to being bowl eligible and then maybe spoiling Indiana or Ohio State's season.
And Joe, at this point, Oregon is number one overall. They are the number one seed in the college football playoff as the Big Ten's automatic qualifier. And Joe, something that you said earlier, this was probably the second best defense they've played. Make that Ohio State and Michigan. They've dropped 30 on both of those. Now, that's not an insane number, but also there's a lot of teams that don't win. You know, they didn't have to score 30 to win, but they did, which made it more comfortable. And ultimately, the Ohio State game really could have gone either way, but the fact that they're still able to score at a high level against a good defense really is a good sign for Oregon. And I don't see them getting challenged until the Big Ten championship, whoever that's against. And, you know, almost certainly they'll be there because they do have a tiebreaker over Ohio State. So if they do lose one, they'd still get the nod over Ohio State. And, you know, I'm not sure if they're tied with someone else how that would go, but they're almost certainly headed there. All right, Joe, up next, we got the Indiana Hoosiers, who come in at number 9 in the college football playoff rankings. They are the 8th seeded team, 9. They'll play against Tennessee in this prediction, but no sense in looking into that because it won't happen. The Hoosiers improved to 9-0. They score 47 unanswered points after dropping behind 10-0. Curtis Rourke comes back after missing just one game. He throws 4 touchdowns, and it's the first 9-0 start in program history. Indiana rolls the Spartans.
Sean, another game where the home team, the home underdog, started off with a 10-0 lead. And after that throw to Nick Marsh by Aiden Childs, I was not watching this game live, but just seeing the reaction from the Michigan State faithful, not only in my group text, but in the stands, there was really a sense of belief that this team turned a corner and that perhaps the Iowa game was more of a performance, was more of the was a better indicator of this team than the Michigan game. Unfortunately for Spartan fans, that quickly dwindled. They did not score a single point after that, outscored 47-0, and from there it got worse. Aiden Childs went back to his old ways, turning over the ball twice in the air. I didn't even believe this stat, but I had to watch the highlights to verify. As a team, they had 32 carries, and yes, some of these were sacks, some of these were fumbles, for minus 36 yards.
Yeah, they got absolutely nothing going on the ground, and even their touchdown drive, they still could not run it. And ultimately, that's how you kind of go about things when you're winning. It's still the old school way. They end up giving up some points to Indiana. They end up having to chase the game, and that's where Aiden Childs has struggled this year. And it got extremely out of hand quick. They were up 10-0 after the first quarter, Joe. And they find themselves down double digits going into halftime, and then the opening drive for them in the second half is a safety, and it got out of hand quick for them. Indiana's offense continues to be impressive. Their defense has actually shown some positive signs. And Joe, with a bye week up next for the Hoosiers and the Buckeyes on the other side of it, many were looking into this as a potential look-ahead spot, and that could not have been more false as the Hoosiers roll here. Michigan State 4-5 bowl eligibility is the name of the game for them going forward. Can they find 2 wins out of their last 3 games at Illinois, home to Purdue, home to Rutgers? You certainly like to think that they would get those the last 2 of those 3. And you know, it'll be interesting to see how we grade this season for Michigan State at the end of it, because you know they've definitely seen some positives, quite a few negatives, and Indiana moves the line another week undefeated.
Yeah, Sean, and I just want to talk about one thing on both teams before we move on. Indiana offensively, this was just as, and I hate saying this because it minimizes what their offense has done. This has just been the consistent trend, Sean, and it's really impressive that I'm saying this at this point of the season. For Michigan State, this is the lowest of low points. You lose a heartbreaking game to your rival where you had plenty of opportunities to win. This game was a disgusting performance. I think they did a lot of good things in the Ohio State loss. I thought they did a lot of good things in the Oregon loss. This game, I can't say, besides the Nick Marsh catch, there's not much positive. And for all the people calling for Aiden Childs' head, you saw what Tommy Schuster did. I'm pretty sure Jonathan Smith brought Aiden Childs in and started him for a reason. He was there every day in practice. Now, the injury to him, I believe, is not season ending.
Yeah, he probably could have come back in this one if they weren't down so much.
Yeah, I think you will see him out there against Illinois. And keep in mind, they do have the bye week. 2 years ago, they were in a similar situation at sitting at 3-5, and they went in and upset at the number 15 ranked Fighting Illini. So there's certainly precedent for that. I don't think that will happen, but for now, Michigan State, you're right, Sean. Bowl eligibility is the game, and then from there we can assess where they stand.
And Joe, just one more thing about that Indiana offense. It was a little bit of a step back with Taven in there instead of Rourke. They still did score 30 against Washington. But, Joe, when it comes to the name of the game in the NFL with quarterbacks these days, I have not seen somebody in college that reads the game better than Curtis Rourke. They always talk about how these rookie quarterbacks, they need a simple college offense. They can't read defenses. There's nothing that Rourke does that some of these other quarterbacks don't do. And I think NFL scouts are going to, if he can get through this season healthy, he's had some knee issues in the past, but it's not as if these defenses are just letting them get throttled. They are changing, and Indiana's been one step ahead. Now, it didn't mean as much when they were doing it in the non-conference and against the UCLAs, but there's a number of pretty solid, not great, but solid teams that they've done this to, and 9-0. The Week 12 game between Ohio State and Indiana essentially will serve as a play-in game for the Big Ten championship, likely. So, Joe, we'll turn the page on this one, and we've got three more. Not a whole lot to talk about from these. First, UCLA goes into Lincoln and gets a big win over Nebraska. Back-to-back impressive wins for the Bruins. They win 27-20. Ethan Garbers is starting to play a little bit better. Two touchdowns, no turnovers. And Raiola and the Cornhuskers dropped to 5-4, disappointing for Matt Rule's team.
Sean, this is probably the most disappointing loss of the Matt Rule era, no matter how you want to spin it. I think the way Nebraska started this season, we were talking about 8-9 wins. I was never a believer that they would threaten the college football playoff this year. In fact, I thought all hopes for that dwindled on that late September Friday evening in Lincoln. Now, ever since that game, Sean, I do not think they've put together a complete performance. That includes the almost victory at Ohio State. The defense has kept them in a lot of games, but the problem is the defense can't afford a bad half, let alone a bad game, because the offense cannot pick it up, and that's unfortunately what happened in this game. I thought being down 20 at home to this UCLA team was downright pathetic, and I don't want to take away anything from UCLA. They have gotten a lot better. We were projecting that they wouldn't even get a conference win this year, and now that they have two with
two road wins left. Too.
Yeah, two road wins.
Far away from home.
And underdogs too, yeah. Sean. Playing in an unideal time zone, one being a nooner, so a 9 a.m., and this one also being 12:30 or 3:30 for 2:30 local in Lincoln. Point is, Sean, this UCLA team does not quit. I think this bodes very well for the future. I think if this is the bottom for UCLA football, there are certainly brighter days ahead. Now, are they going to be lifting CFP national title trophies or Big Ten title trophies? Probably not anytime soon, but I do think they can make their way to the middle of the pack in the next few years. Sean, I want to narrow it on Nebraska before you do, because I've been holding this in a while. There's no possible way you could not go to a bowl game this year. There have been plenty of games this year where you did not play well and won. Purdue, Rutgers, and let's face it, Sean, at USC, home to Wisconsin, and at Iowa, you're probably not going to be favored at any of those games. Maybe Wisconsin, but even then, you have to steal one of those. Your fan base cannot go, I believe, 8 years in a row. Yep, since 2016. You cannot go 8 years in a row at Nebraska not making a bowl game. I don't care who the coach is. I don't care if it's Matt Rule, Scott Frost, Mike Riley, Bo Pelini, Frank Solich, whoever. That is borderline pathetic. And since joining the Big Ten Conference, Sean, in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, they've been bowl eligible in only 5 of their 14 seasons. Now they made 6 bowl games, but only been bowl eligible 6 wins or more 5 times. And this is a historic blue blood program. That's
And
unacceptable,
I feel
and
like
that has to be addressed.
I feel like the younger generation, Joe, kind of us included, doesn't really know that about Nebraska, and we certainly follow the sport closer than most people, and we know that. But there's a couple people that are just downright shocked when you talk about Nebraska football being this sort of powerhouse. And by no means will a 6-6 season be a success for them, but that they have to get there. They have to be playing a 13th game just as a stepping stone, whether it was to, you know, they were looking at 8 or 9 wins this year, and they're not going to get there. They absolutely have to get to a bowl, and then we'll see where we go from there. UCLA, Joe, does have 4 games left. They do not have another bye, so maybe they can get 3 wins out of there and sneak a bowl. That would be quite impressive considering where they were at the beginning of the year. They host Iowa, they go on the road to Washington, they host UCLA, and they host Fresno State. So 3 home games in there, a road game against a team that's good but not great. Maybe the Bruins can find themselves 3 wins out of that pack. All right, 2 more left, Joe. Iowa drops another 40 bomb, this time on Wisconsin. The Hawkeyes improved to 6-3 with a 42-10 victory against Wisconsin. The Badgers started to get some momentum going. That's halted as they dropped to 5-4. And Iowa's offense showing up at least some of the time this year.
Yeah, Sean, I did think that the transition to, and unfortunately, I'm a big Cade McNamara fan. I've never hid that on this podcast. Uh, the transition to Brendan Sullivan's been a lot better for this team. It's allowed Caleb Johnson uh, to have more running space because you have to commit an extra defender for Sullivan. Maybe not at every play, but on a lot of these plays. He himself on the ground, 9 carries for 58 total yards. I thought that was really impressive. Also ran for 1. So what this Iowa offense has done by having another running threat has significantly increased the ceiling of it. Now it's unfortunate that it's happened so late into October and November, but I do think it's something they can build off for next year and later into this year. And kind of like Illinois, Sean, you look at Iowa's schedule, 3 very winnable games, all games they're going to be favored in. You could get to 10 wins. Now, I think the expectation at its ceiling this year was to get to Indy just because of the lighter schedule. Now that that's out the window, I don't think 10 wins is going to be the worst consolation prize.
Yeah, they're when they look good, Joe, they look really good. This is as good as an Iowa offense has looked, certainly in our time viewing the sport. Caleb Johnson is awesome. Brandon Sullivan does have some more eligibility left, so if you can get him to be the quarterback next year, you think maybe there's something to build from there. And in terms of the defense, Iowa's defense is as good as it usually is. Caleb Johnson also has another year now. Whether he goes pro or not, that's up for debate. But all we asked for this Iowa team this year was to show some glimpses offensively, because, Joe, that defense was elite last year. Now, the defense may have taken a little bit of a step back, losing a couple of NFL players, but having not watched a ton of Iowa this year, some of these box scores are pretty incredible, and definitely didn't see this sort of annihilation of a pretty good football team in Wisconsin coming. And like you said, there's room for a really strong end of the season for the Hawkeyes. All right, up next, Joe, we got a former Pac-12 rivalry. USC goes up north to Washington, and the Huskies get the job done. Huskies improved to 5-4 with a 26-21 win. USC and Lincoln Riley dropped to 4-5. Disappointment for the Trojans, while Washington gets one step closer to a bowl.
John, the fact this is on the Big Ten Network is
says a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you put someone in a coma even 3 years ago, and they wake up to see this. I think they would question whether they were transported to another universe. Now, speaking of another universe, 19 home games in a row won for Washington. That includes a year where they're 5-4. That's amazing. It really is. And that includes, I know Michigan and USC certainly underperformed from their once top 10 rankings, but that shouldn't be scoffed at all. And if that streak extends into next year, which I'm inclined to believe it will, considering they only play UCLA at home the rest of the year, it's a statistic that's going to be examined throughout college football. Now, USC, I think a lot of the stories going to be Miller Moss. He is going to be benched for Maeva in their next game against Nebraska in 2 weeks. But I just want to talk about Washington. Jonah Coleman, Will Rogers. We've talked about them. These guys have been the MVPs for Washington this year, and it was no different on Saturday. Denzel Boston getting open. I think the combo of Coleman, Boston, and Will Rogers is that trio, I should say, is one of the best in the conference. I think if their defense did them better in a few games, and uh, the Washington State game or the Rutgers game, certainly a few plays to be made there. This team would probably be 7-2 and ranked within the top 20. So I think this is a really dangerous team, Sean. I know they don't play. They're not going to be in games where a lot of people are going to expect a one-score game within against a road game at Oregon. Certainly not in the whiteout. But I think if this team doesn't turn the ball over and Jonah Coleman runs wild, it opens up the entire field for Will Rogers, which is really scary to opposing defenses. And I highly doubt they're going to beat Penn State. My one note of caution for Penn State would be if you cannot stop Jonah Coleman, I think Will Rogers has the capabilities to pick you apart. And if Washington could control that clock, I think Penn State might be in for a tougher matchup in a whiteout than they would have once expected. USC dug themselves a hole. I thought they did a lot of really good things in the second half. Ultimately, I think Miller Moss is a great quarterback. I do think he will be in the portal now that he is benched. But
I know a team that needs a quarterback, Joe. Would you take him?
Yeah.
Would
I'm
you
not
take
going to
him?
answer that. Yes. If we don't get Bryson, I don't think we're going to get Bryce Underwood. Yes, I think I'll make the declaration now. I would be surprised if Miller Moss was not at another Big Ten program, another good Big Ten program starting. But we'll leave it at that. November 5th, 2024, I will say that. Outside of that, though, Sean, you see the interceptions, you see the spectacular throws, but it's also coupled with the interceptions. And unfortunately for USC, even with a great performance from Woody Marks, that was too much to overcome. So USC 4-5 on the year, and like Michigan, the two teams that played on September 21st, who were both top 10 teams, are going to be scraping for bowl eligibility the rest of this season.
Hey, Joe, this was just a simple gut check win for Washington. You go up big, up 20-7 at halftime. You look like you're headed towards victory. You relinquish the lead there going into the fourth quarter. You get it back, and you finish the game. Those sorts of games that swing up and down with crazy different momentum shifts, those, especially as the home team, when you have a big lead, you lose it. That crowd gets nervous. It's very easy, really, in any sport to sort of feel that. But they get the job done here. They get to 5-4. They have a UCLA team that they can beat to get to 6-4, but or to get to 6 wins rather, and go to a bowl. But I think we certainly expected better from USC. I don't know if we expected better from Washington. I think they're a good team. Certainly not as good as last year, but if they win one or two games down the stretch here, I think you can say that year one for Jed Fish in a new team, in a new conference, definitely wasn't a D or F type performance. But Joe, unless you have anything to add, that's everything we have today for our Week 10 recap. Be sure to check out the other videos on the channel. We got some college basketball ones coming soon, and then eventually we will preview Week 11 this weekend. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in.